The bitter wind of the Colorado Territory cut through the mountain pass like a blade, carrying with it the promise of an early winter that would test every soul brave enough to call this wilderness home. Tom McKenna pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his shoulders as he guided his horse down the treacherous slope, the animal's breath forming ghostly clouds in the frigid air. He had been riding hard for 3 days, fleeing memories that seemed to follow him no matter how far west he traveled. Tom had once been a different man, a man with a home, a woman who loved him, and dreams that stretched as wide as the prairie sky. But that was before the war, before he'd returned to find his ranch burned and his beloved Sarah married to another. Believing the lies that he had died at Gettysburg, the betrayal had carved a hollow place in his chest that no amount of whiskey or wandering could fill. As evening shadows began to paint the mountainside purple, Tom spotted something that made him rein in his horse. There, huddled against a massive boulder like a small, dark bird fallen from its nest, was a figure barely visible in the growing dusk. His heart clenched as he realized it was a young woman, her slight frame trembling violently in the merciless cold. Without hesitation, Tom dismounted and approached cautiously. The woman was Apache, perhaps 17 or 18 years old, with long black hair that had come loose from its braids and now whipped around her face in the wind. Her traditional dress was inadequate for the plummeting temperature, and her lips had taken on a dangerous blue tinge. Most troubling of all, her dark eyes held a look Tom recognized all too well, the hollow stare of someone who had lost everything. "Miss," he called softly, not wanting to startle her, "you're going to freeze to death out here?" She looked up at him with those haunting eyes, and for a moment neither spoke. Tom saw no fear in her gaze, only a weary resignation that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Here was another soul adrift in this harsh world, someone who understood the weight of loss. Without another word, Tom shrugged off his heavy woolen blanket, the one his mother had made for him before she passed, the only thing of real value he still carried. The blanket was thick and warm, woven with love and memories of a gentler time. He wrapped it carefully around the young woman's shoulders, his calloused hands gentle as he pulled it snug beneath her chin. "There now," he murmured, his voice carrying the soft drawl of his Texas roots. "This'll keep the cold at bay." The woman's eyes widened with surprise, and for the first time, a spark of something other than despair flickered across her features. She pulled the blanket closer, and Tom could see her shivering begin to subside. "I'm Tom," he said, settling back on his heels, but staying close enough to share what little warmth he could. "What's your name?" For a long moment, she remained silent. Then, in a voice as soft as wind through pine needles, she whispered, "Ayanna. It means ... eternal blossom." The name suited her, Tom thought. Even in her current state of distress, there was something enduringly beautiful about her, like a wildflower that blooms despite the harsh conditions of its environment. "Ayanna," he repeated, the name feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue. "That's a beautiful name. What are you doing out here alone? Where's your family?" Her face crumpled then, and Tom's heart ached as he watched tears begin to track down her cheeks. "Gone," she whispered. "All gone. The soldiers came 3 days ago. They said we were harboring outlaws, but we were not. My father, my brothers, my mother." Her voice broke completely. Tom felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same anger that had consumed him when he'd learned of his own losses. But looking at this broken young woman, he felt something else as well. Fierce protectiveness he hadn't experienced since before the war had stolen his capacity for hope. "I'm sorry," he said simply, because there were no other words adequate for such grief. "I'm truly sorry." They sat together in the growing darkness, two wounded souls finding unexpected comfort in shared silence. As the first stars began to appear overhead, Tom made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come with me," he said. "I've got supplies, a warm fire waiting at my camp. You don't have to face this night alone." Ayanna looked at him for a long moment, studying his weathered face in the starlight. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she nodded and allowed him to help her to her feet. Tom's camp was tucked into a natural shelter formed by overhanging rocks, protected from the worst of the wind. He had built a small fire that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, creating a pocket of warmth and light in the vast wilderness. As Ayanna settled beside the fire, still wrapped in his blanket, Tom busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and hardtack. "You're not like the other white men," Ayanna said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Tom glanced up from the fire where he was heating their food. "How so?" "You look at me and see a person, not an enemy. Your eyes are ... kind." Tom felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I've learned that kindness is one of the few things that survives in this harsh world. Lost too much of everything else to waste what little humanity I have left." As they shared their meager meal, Tom found himself opening up to this young woman in ways he hadn't with anyone since losing Sarah. He told her about the war, about coming home to find his life in ruins, about the endless wandering that had brought him to these mountains. In return, Ayanna shared her own story of loss, how her family had lived peacefully until false accusations brought soldiers to their village, how she had hidden and watched everything she loved burn to ash. "I should have died with them," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "No," Tom said firmly, reaching across the fire to touch her hand. "You survived for a reason, Ayanna. Sometimes living is the hardest thing we can do, but it's also the bravest." That night, as Ayanna slept curled in his blanket by the dying fire, Tom kept watch with his rifle across his knees. He found himself studying her peaceful face in the firelight, marveling at how someone so young could carry such profound loss with such grace. There was a strength in her that called to something deep in his soul, something he thought the war had killed forever. When dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Tom woke to find Ayanna already awake, watching him with those dark, thoughtful eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the blanket, for the food, for ... for seeing me as human." Before Tom could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. Both of them tensed, and Tom's hand instinctively moved to his gun. But as the riders came into view, Tom realized they were Apache warriors, their faces painted for war, but their posture more curious than threatening. The lead warrior, a man with silver threading his black hair and scars, telling stories of countless battles, dismounted and approached their camp. His eyes moved from Ayanna, still wrapped in Tom's blanket, to Tom himself, taking in every detail with the sharp assessment of someone accustomed to reading potential enemies. "I am Chief Nyack," the man said in English, his voice carrying the authority of leadership. "This is my daughter, Ayanna." Tom's heart lurched with surprise and a sudden understanding of how precarious his situation had become. He slowly stood, his hands visible and non-threatening, but ready to protect Ayanna if necessary. "Sir," Tom began, but the chief raised a hand to silence him. Chief Nyack's gaze moved to the blanket wrapped around his daughter's shoulders. Something Tom couldn't quite read flickered across the older man's features. The chief spoke rapidly in Apache to several of his warriors, who nodded and began to murmur among themselves. "Gave my daughter your blanket," Chief Nyack said, turning back to Tom. "Yes, sir. She was freezing. Couldn't just leave her to die." The chief nodded slowly, then said something that made Tom's world tilt on its axis. "In our tradition, when a man gives a woman his blanket in such circumstances, he declares his intention to marry her and care for her as his wife." Tom felt the blood drain from his face. He glanced at Ayanna, who had gone very still beside him, her dark eyes wide with what might have been hope or terror, he couldn't tell which. "Chief Nyack," Tom said carefully, "I meant no disrespect. I was only trying to save her life, and by doing so, you have bound yourself to her according to our ways," the chief replied. "The question now is whether you will honor this bond or abandon my daughter, as others of your kind have abandoned their promises." Tom looked at Ayanna again, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his chest. In her eyes he saw not just the pain of recent loss, but a strength and beauty that called to his lonely soul. He thought of his empty years of wandering, of the hollow place where his heart used to be, and realized that this moment felt like the first ray of sunlight after an endless winter. "I would be honored to marry your daughter, Tom," said quietly, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. If she have me? Ayana's breath caught audibly, and Tom saw tears begin to gather in her eyes. But these were different tears than the ones she'd shed the night before. These held something that looked remarkably like joy. You would do this? She whispered. You would take me as your wife, knowing that your people will turn against you for marrying an Apache woman. Tom stepped closer to her, gently taking her hands in his. Ayana, I've lost everything that mattered to me once before. I won't make the mistake of letting love slip away again, no matter what others might think. Chief Nyack watched this exchange with sharp eyes, and Tom saw the exact moment when the older man's expression shifted from suspicion to something approaching approval. There will be conditions, the chief said. You will learn our ways. You will protect her not just with your gun, but with your understanding of who she is and where she comes from. And if you ever harm her or abandon her, my warriors will hunt you to the ends of the earth. I understand, Tom replied solemnly. And I swear to you, I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving myself worthy of her. But even as Tom spoke these words, he could see doubt flickering in some of the warriors' eyes. One of them, a younger man with fierce scarring across his chest, stepped forward with his hand on his knife. Father, the warrior said, his English heavily accented but clear, this white man speaks pretty words, but what of his actions? How do we know he will not lead soldiers to us, or sell us to the government for bounty money? Atakota speaks wisdom, another warrior added. The white eyes have broken every promise they have ever made to our people. Tom felt the delicate moment beginning to fracture, and desperation clawed at his chest. He had found something precious here, something worth fighting for, and he would not let it slip away without a fight. You're right to doubt me, Tom said, addressing the warriors directly. I can't change what other white men have done, and I can't prove my intentions with words alone. But I can tell you this, I have nothing left in the white world. No family, no home, no future waiting for me there. Everything I have ever cared about was taken from me, just like everything you care about has been threatened or destroyed. Turned to look at Ayana, his heart in his eyes. But last night, sitting by that fire with your daughter, I felt something I thought was dead forever. Hope, purpose, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could build something good from the ashes of what I've lost. Chief Nyack studied Tom for a long, tense moment. Then he spoke rapidly in Apache to his warriors. The conversation that followed was heated, with voices rising and falling like wind through the canyon. Tom caught enough words to understand that. They were debating his fate, and, by extension, Ayana's future. Finally, Chief Nyack raised his hand for silence. My daughter has already suffered much loss, he said to Tom. If you bring her more pain, you will answer to me personally. But, double quotes, he paused, glancing at Ayana, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. She is grown, and she has the right to choose her own path. She wishes to bind her life to yours. I will not stand in her way. All eyes turned to Ayana then, and Tom felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he waited for her answer. The young woman stood slowly, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders like a symbol of the choice she faced. When the soldiers came, she said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air, I thought my life was over. I had nothing left to live for, no future to imagine. But this man, this stranger, he saw me dying in the cold and gave me his blanket, his protection, without asking for anything in return. She turned to look at Tom, and he saw his whole future reflected in her dark eyes. In one night, he showed me more kindness than I have known since my family died. He listened to my grief without judgment, shared his food without complaint, and treated me as if I mattered in this world. Ayana took a step toward Tom, her decision clear in every line of her body. If he will have me, I will be his wife. Not because of tradition or obligation, but because I choose him. Because he is a good man, and good men are rare in this harsh world. The canyon fell silent, except for the wind whistling through the rocks. Tom felt tears he hadn't shed since childhood burning behind his eyes as he reached for Ayana's hands. Are you certain? He asked quietly. Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to a wandering cowboy with nothing to offer but his protection and his promise to love you." Ayanna smiled then, the first real smile Tom had seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "And you'll be tied to an Apache woman whose people are hunted and whose future is uncertain? I think we're both taking the same risk." Chief Nyack stepped forward then, his expression grave but not unkind. "If this is to be done, it will be done properly, according to our traditions. You will both come back to our winter camp. There will be ceremonies, rituals, to bind you properly as husband and wife." And Tom McKenna, he fixed the cowboy with a sharp look. "You will prove yourself worthy not just to me, but to our entire people." Over the following weeks, Tom found himself living among the Apache in their hidden winter camp, learning customs and traditions that were as foreign to him as his own background was to them. It was not easy. Many of the younger warriors remained suspicious of his motives, and some of the older women whispered that no good could come of mixing Apache blood with white. But Tom persevered, driven by his growing love for Ayanna and his desperate need to prove himself worthy of the second chance he'd been given. He learned to speak basic Apache phrases, participated in hunting parties, and slowly began to earn the grudging respect of some of the more skeptical tribe members. Most importantly, he spent every possible moment with Ayanna, learning her dreams and fears, sharing his own hopes for their future together. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, planning the life they would build together once they were properly married, a small ranch somewhere safe. Children who would grow up knowing both their heritages, a love that would grow stronger with each passing year, but their happiness was fragile. And Tom should have known that happiness never lasted long in this harsh territory. The attack came at dawn on what should have been Tom and Ayanna's wedding day. A cavalry unit, led by a captain whose hatred for all Indians burned in his pale eyes like a fever, swept down on the winter camp with guns blazing and torches, ready to burn everything they couldn't steal. Tom fought beside his soon-to-be Apache, brothers, his rifle hot in his hands as he tried desperately to protect the people who had become his family. But there were too many soldiers, and they had the advantage of surprise. In the chaos of the battle, Tom saw Ayanna fall, struck by a soldier's bullet as she tried to help the children escape. The sight of her crumpling to the ground tore a scream from his throat that seemed to echo off the surrounding mountains. He fought his way to her side, cradling her in his arms as blood seeped through her traditional wedding dress, the beautiful white buckskin decorated with beads and quillwork that the women had spent weeks preparing for their ceremony. "Ayanna," he whispered desperately, pressing his hands against the wound in her side. "Stay with me, please, stay with me." Her dark eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. "Tom," she breathed, her voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. "The blanket. Do you still have the blanket?" Tom's throat constricted with grief and desperation. "It's safe, my love. It's waiting for us at home." She smiled weakly, lifting one trembling hand to touch his cheek. "I don't find you there," she whispered. "In whatever comes after this, ... I'll find you." "No," Tom said fiercely, gathering her closer. "You're not leaving me. We're going to be married today, remember? Yes. You're going to be my wife, and we're going to have that ranch and children." But her eyes had already closed, and Tom felt her go still in his arms. The keening wail that tore from his chest seemed to rise from the very depths of his soul, carrying all the grief and rage and desperate love that he couldn't contain. Around him, the battle continued to rage, but Tom heard none of it. His entire world had narrowed to the woman in his arms, the love he had found and lost in the space of a few precious weeks. When Chief Nyack found him, hours later, Tom was still holding Ayanna's body, rocking slowly back and forth as tears carved tracks through the dirt and gunpowder on his face. The battle was over. The soldiers had been driven off, but at a terrible cost. Too many good people lay dead in the morning sun. "My son," the chief said gently, kneeling beside Tom. "She is gone. You must let her go." "I can't," Tom whispered brokenly. "I can't lose her. Not when I just found her. Not like this." Chief Nyack was quiet for a long moment, his own grief etched deeply in the lines of his weathered face. "Love like yours does not die with the body," he said finally. "It continues like the wind through the mountains, like the stars in the sky. Ayana's spirit will wait for you, but first you must live the life she would have wanted you to live." But Tom couldn't hear wisdom through his grief. For 3 days, he sat beside Ayana's body, refusing food, refusing comfort, refusing to accept a world without her in it. It was only when Chief Nyack threatened to have him physically removed that Tom finally allowed them to prepare her for burial according to Apache tradition. The funeral was held at sunset, on a high ridge overlooking the valley where they had planned to build their ranch. As the Apache people sang their ancient songs of farewell, Tom stood apart, clutching the woolen blanket that had started everything, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. After the ceremony, as the tribe prepared to move to safer territory, Chief Nyack approached Tom one final time.
What will you do now?"
The older man asked. Tom stared out at the vast wilderness, stretching endlessly in all directions. "I don't know," he admitted. "Everything I had planned, everything I hoped for, ... It was all tied up with her." "Then perhaps it is time to discover what else you might be meant for," Chief Nyack suggested gently. "Ayana saw something in you worth loving. Honor that by becoming the man she believed you could be." Tom nodded numbly, but he felt hollow inside, like a shell of his former self. As the Apache people prepared to leave, many of them approached him to offer words of farewell and encouragement. Despite everything, they had accepted him as one of their own, and their grief at losing him was genuine. "You will always be welcome among us," Chief Nyack said as they prepared to part ways. "You are family now, bonded by blood and loss and love. If you ever need a home, you know where to find us." With that, the Apache rode away, leaving Tom alone on the ridge with his grief and his memories and the blanket that had changed everything. 4 weeks, Tom wandered aimlessly through the territory, drinking too much, sleeping too little, and generally living like a man with nothing left to lose. He took dangerous jobs, picked fights with outlaws, and seemed determined to join Ayana in whatever came after this life. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for him. It was in a small mining town called Silver Creek that Tom's life took yet another unexpected turn. He had stopped there only to resupply and drink himself into temporary oblivion. But as he sat in the saloon nursing his third whiskey, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "I tell you, Captain Morrison's got the right idea." One man was saying to his companion, "Round up all the remaining Apache and ship them off to reservations where they can't cause any more trouble." "What about the ones that are already peaceful?" the other man asked. "Peaceful?" The first man laughed harshly. "There's no such thing as a peaceful Indian. Morrison proved that when he wiped out that camp last month. They were harboring outlaws," he said, "and when the smoke cleared, there wasn't a single one left to tell lies about it." Tom's hand tightened on his glass until his knuckles went white. These men were talking about the attack on Ayana's camp, about the massacre that had taken her life and the lives of so many innocents. "Morrison's got a promotion coming, mark my words," the first man continued. "The Army likes officers who get results, and dead Indians are definitely results." Before Tom realized he was moving, he was on his feet, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. The saloon fell silent as every eye turned to the tall, dangerous-looking cowboy who stood, swaying slightly from drink and rage. "You want to say that again?" Tom asked quietly, his voice carrying a deadly edge that made several patrons quietly move away from the bar. The man who had been speaking, a soft, pale fellow, who looked like he'd never been in a real fight in his life, puffed up indignantly. "I said Morrison's a hero for cleaning out that nest of savages. Got a problem with that, cowboy?" Tom's vision went red around the edges. "Yeah," he said softly, "I got a problem with that." The fight that followed was swift and brutal. Tom had learned violence in the war and refined it during his years of wandering, and his grief gave him a strength that was terrible to behold. When the dust settled, 2 men lay unconscious on the saloon floor, and Tom was bleeding from a cut over his eye but still standing. Anyone else want to call innocent people savages? He asked the room at large. No one answered, but Tom could see the fear and anger in their eyes. He had made enemies here, dangerous ones, who would remember his face and spread word of his sympathies. As Tom stumbled out of the saloon into the cool night air, he found himself face to face with the town's Sharifa-weathered man with kind eyes and a badge that had seen better days. "Son," the sheriff said quietly, "I heard what happened in there. Can't say I blame you for your feelings, but you've stirred up a hornet's nest. Those men have friends, and some of those friends wear army uniforms." Tom spat blood into the dust at his feet. "Let them come. It's grief talking, not sense." The sheriff observed. "You got somewhere to go? Someone who might take you in until this blows over?" Tom thought of Chief Nyack's parting words, of the offer of a home among people who had loved Ayanna as much as he had. "Maybe," he said finally. "Then I suggest you get going," the sheriff advised. "Tonight, if you're smart, word travels fast in these parts, and not all of it travels in your favor." Tom nodded his thanks and made his way to the livery stable, where he had left his horse. As he saddled the animal by moonlight, his hands still shaking from the fight and the whiskey, he found himself thinking about what the sheriff had said. He was indeed being driven by grief, making decisions that would have seemed insane to the man he used to be. But as he mounted his horse and turned toward the mountains where Chief Nyack's people were wintering, Tom realized that grief wasn't the only thing driving him. For the first time since Ayanna's death, he felt something like purpose stirring in his chest. Captain Morrison, the man responsible for the massacre, was still out there, still hunting innocent people, still destroying families like the one Tom had briefly been part of. And if the conversation in the saloon was any indication, Morrison was being rewarded for his brutality. That couldn't stand. Tom couldn't bring Ayanna back, couldn't undo the suffering that had been inflicted on her. But maybe he could prevent it from happening to others. Maybe he could find some meaning in his loss by making sure Morrison faced justice for his crimes. It took Tom 3 days of hard riding to catch up with Chief Nyack's band. And when he finally rode into their camp, he was met with a mixture of surprise and concern. He looked terrible hollow-eyed, unshaven, and carrying himself like a man who had forgotten how to hope. "Chief." Nyack emerged from his lodge and studied Tom for a long moment before speaking. "You look like a man who has found something worth fighting for," the chief observed. "Morrison," Tom said simply, "the captain who led the attack on your camp, he's still out there, still killing innocent people. Someone needs to stop him." The chief nodded slowly. "And you believe you are that someone?" "I don't know," Tom admitted. "But I have to try. I can't bring her back. But maybe I can prevent him from taking anyone else's Ayanna." Chief Nyack was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire that burned at the center of the camp. Around them, the daily life of the tribe continued, children playing, women preparing food, men tending to weapons and horses. It was a scene of peaceful domesticity that belied the constant danger these people lived under. "Morrison is a dangerous man," the chief said finally. "He has soldiers under his command, the backing of the army, and no conscience to limit his actions. What can one man do against such odds?" Tom pulled Ayanna's blanket from his saddlebags, holding the soft wool gently in his hands. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I have to try. She deserves justice, and so do all the others he's killed." Chief Nyack studied Tom's face in the firelight, and whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "Then you will not go alone," he said finally. "Morrison has made enemies among my people as well. There are warriors who would be honored to ride with you on such a mission." Over the following days, a plan began to take shape. Tom learned that Morrison was currently stationed at Fort Defiance, where he was preparing for another pacification mission against a peaceful Apache band led by an elderly chief named Manolito. The attack was scheduled for the new moon, and darkness would provide cover for another massacre. But this time, Morrison would find his intended victims ready for him. Tom and 6 Apache warriors, led by Takeda, the same young man who had initially doubted Tom's intentions, spent a week scouting the fort and learning Morrison's routines. They discovered that the captain was a creature of habit, making regular rides outside. to the fort's walls to survey the surrounding territory. It was during one of these rides that they struck. The confrontation took place in a narrow canyon about 5 miles from the fort, where Morrison and his small escort had stopped to water their horses. Tom and the Apache warriors had positioned themselves on the canyon rim with clear shots at the soldiers below. "Captain Morrison," Tom called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I'd like a word with you." Morrison looked up his pale eyes scanning the rim until they found Tom. Even at a distance, Tom could see recognition dawn on the captain's face. "You're the cowboy from Silver Creek," Morrison called back. "The Indian lover who started the fight in the saloon?" "I'm the man whose wife you murdered," Tom replied, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Along with a dozen other innocent people," Morrison laughed, a sound devoid of any human warmth. Innocent? They were harboring outlaws? Boy, they got what they deserved. "They were peaceful people trying to survive the winter," Tom shot back. "The only outlaw in that canyon was you." Standoff stretched taut between them, 6 soldiers below facing 7 determined men above. Tom could see Morrison calculating his odds, could practically watch the man's mind working through his options. "What do you want?" Morrison called finally. "Justice," Tom replied. "You're going to confess to your crimes, and you're going to face trial for murder."